All right, we are live and folks are tuning in, and we'll just give it a few minutes and then we'll get started. Thanks to everyone who's tuning in. We'll give it about 2 more minutes and get started. Perfect. We eventually just have to stop and hit print it, and let's see what happens. It's fun for a while. Yeah, Claudia is pretty good at design. I like comment more than beautiful. Well, all righty, I think we'll get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Dan Waldvogel. I'm the membership coordinator with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. Thank you for joining us today to the Colorado Grain Chain Homeschool Webinar Series number 15 we're on. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll just give you some heads up. This video is being recorded. You'll be able to access it from coloradograinchain.com. There'll be a link to a YouTube link within the week after this filming. And then also for Grain Chain members, you can access other goodies such as recipes and other meeting notes and information, and maybe even have a follow-up question if you have something that comes up after this. One other thing of information for Colorado Grain Chain, their next racial justice bake sale is September 19th. So they're raising funds for nonprofits that are doing social justice work here in Colorado. So sign up for email updates at grainchain.com and get involved in that. As far as today goes, feel free to use the Q&A function. That's going to be the best way to ask questions throughout the session. We do have the chat function, which you can also use, but really the best way to curate questions and make sure they get answered is through that Q&A function. With that, we'll turn it over to our speakers. We are really fortunate today to have Claudia Bouvier and Ted Steen from Pastificio. Pastificio is a craft pasta company based in Boulder, and they're making pasta from 100% whole grain flour. Really excited, and you know, early on during our stay-at-home time, we made some homemade pasta. It was a really great memory, and really excited to learn more from you guys and get some tips of the trade. So I'll hand it over to you and let you guys take it away. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Dan. You even got the name pronounced right. I don't know if you had to practice that, but it takes a while. I still don't always get it correct myself. I'm not from an Italian lineage. Anyway, first, my name is Ted Steen, and this is Claudia, obviously. And we have a craft pasta company called Pastificio Boulder, or Pastificio Boulder, as I don't always get it correct. We call it craft pasta simply because that's what it is. We believe in what we're doing at a hand level, and we believe in showing people what we're doing and kind of bringing back a connection and a transparency with eaters in the world. It's become kind of obvious to a lot of us that food systems are not so transparent, and that often you don't know where your food is coming from. You don't know who's growing it. You don't know what they're doing to it. And that's not to our benefit. And so simply the term know your farmer, we've kind of extended it to say also know your miller, know your baker, know your pasta maker. We think it's just good to know where your food comes from. I mean, we all know this probably. Everyone listening probably already knows this, and that's why you're tuning in. But that food becomes you, and what you put in your body determines your life. And so that's really the essence for our company, and our motivation is really to try to bring better food into the world, because I think we've slipped, and we're trying to play our role in trying to bring it back. We chose pasta, I think mostly for two reasons. One, it's fun. You almost say the word pasta and it brings a smile to people's face. So it's not an intimidating or difficult thing for people to grasp. Everyone seems to like pasta, and there's so many ways to prepare it. The other reason that we did it is because Claudia has a family connection with Italy, although she grew up in Brazil. We have visited Italy quite a few times and fallen in love with Italy. And we used to ask ourselves, why do we like Italy so much? What is it? You know, we talk about it on a daily basis. Why are we so infatuated with Italy? And what we concluded was that they have a lot of craft in their culture still. They still take a lot of care and pride at what they're doing. And you can find people really specialized in what they're doing who have been doing it for generations. And we related to that. And I think it was strong for us simply because we didn't feel that that was always the case here in America, that we always seemed to be searching for the fastest, cheapest option, and that's good enough. And so along the way of growing up in my 50 years, I've kind of felt there was an emptiness in that. And so when we landed in Italy and saw all this stuff, it really was powerful for us. And so we wanted to be part of it, and we started reading about wheat a few years ago and realized there was really a revolution going on with grain. And while there had been a revolution going on in farmers markets and heirloom vegetables for years, so it's amazing that products like wheat sort of got overlooked for a long time. Sort of assumed that flour would just last forever on your shelf. And it's actually not true, as most of us know. We're a part of this call. So this is sort of a fun project for us, I'd say, or not sort of. We love it. We like doing this. We like having a mission, but we also like the process. And it's been a process of discovery. We don't have a background in pasta. So we've had to learn this along the way, and it's been challenging working with whole grains, simply because they're just harder to work with when you have the whole grain in there, and the bran and the germ and the natural oils. There's just issues that come up that you don't have when you have white flour. And it's been frustrating. There's days that are very frustrating, but there are days that are so rewarding. And in the end, we've been doing this this is our third year. We spent the first 2 years at the Boulder Farmers Market testing this idea and seeing, could we actually make the pasta using whole grains? That was our first thing. We concluded that we can, but it's a challenge, but we can. And we're comfortable now with what we've learned. The second thing is, will people like it? And I would say that yes, they do. there's still a gap between the mainstream audience and what we're doing. So we're trying to find ways to accommodate them as well and sort of bridge the gap with maybe a 50% whole grain mix of dough. And that actually is more palatable to some people. I think it's better to get people engaged than not. So I think that's my introduction. Maybe Claudia wants to say a few words, and then we could talk about some grains. We're going to talk about milling, and then pastas. Claudia's going to do a presentation later. But I will say that we would welcome comments or questions, and at any point in the conversation, just so that they don't have to get held to the end. So if you do have them, if you want to write them into Dan or Kim, and they can pass them on to us so that we can answer them at the relevant time. So that's all I have for now. So you want to say a few
good
things?
Introduction, right? So yeah, pretty much what Ted said is true. We feel that the pasta making using those heritage and ancient wheats has been a learning process for us. In the very beginning, at least for myself and growing up in an Italian family, much of this has been into the craft, the tradition, the sharing, the community. And as we kept navigating, we try to eat as healthy as possible. So since the beginning, I grew up with my grandparents making pasta and my mom making pasta. So it has always been somehow part of our growing up in tradition and family. But getting older and having kids, the whole mindset shift to, can we have a healthier pasta? Can we have a better pasta? Tastes good, but is it still good, not only for our bodies, but the environment? So I think the process of discovering those wheats and trying to make them work into machines that are designed for white flour has been pretty interesting. We are going, as Ted said, we're going to talk about different things, probably start with the grains, the milling, and then go to the two parts of pasta making and do some fun stuff with our hands. So do you want to talk about the grains, the wheats?
Yep. All right, Dana, are there any questions so far that we should pause for a second?
No, that we don't have any in yet, so just keep on a rolling. But I definitely have some things I'd love to ask you if they don't get covered.
Okay.
Jumping into the weeds, maybe?
Yes, so I think I read a book when we first started this called Grain of Truth, and to be honest, I still have it. It's a library book that I have paid probably $100 in fines. Yep, I have it here, actually. It sits by my bed, and I read it over and over again. And it's written by a journalist who wanted to get to the bottom of what's going on with wheat. And I know there's a lot of books written about this, and I know Amy Halloran was on last week, and I also read that book and read lots of books. But I think this was the one that kind of first made me realize the fun with all the different grains that are out there. I call it fun just because I kind of thought it was just one type of flour out there for a long time. And when I discovered that, in fact, no, wheat comes in hundreds, if not thousands, of different sub-varieties, and that each one could potentially have its own interesting traits and flavors and nutritional benefits, it was really exciting to think, well, couldn't we present those and profile those into pasta? I was aware that people like Andy, who's here today, Andy Clark from Moxie, was doing this with bread, and bread is the natural place where people would think of this, but I don't think people always thought of it with pasta. And I think most people assume that pasta is a white pasta that really has a neutral flavor and that really is just a sort of a way to get your sauce to your mouth. Yeah. And we're happy to say that that's not actually true, that when you work with these different grains and you fresh mill some flours into there of different types, you pick up different flavors, different textures. And so it's really fun. And so we do have 6 different grains here, and we'll try to get a closer video of this if Andy wants to help us. And these are simply some of the grains that we use regularly. If we start at this end, this is durum, which I'm sure all of you have heard of durum. We're showing the grain and the flour. So we milled all these flours this morning, just a little bit to show some of the differences in color. So this is durum. This was grown organically. Everything we buy is organic. This was grown in Washington State. It is the base of most of our pastas. It is the base of most pastas historically. It doesn't mean you have to use durum all the time, but it is the one we use predominantly as sort of the foundation. The next grain next to it is called camu, and also known as Coruscant. This one was grown in Montana, and Bob Quinn was the originator of that.
Yeah.
And he's helping us out with a Coruscant head. And camu is an ancient grain, and many of you already probably know that, so I won't dwell on that, but it is related to durum. There are some who say that durum came first and camu was a spin-off of that, and I've heard the other said as well. I don't really know. We're going back 6,000 years, so they're both ancient grains at this point, durum and camu. Next to that, the next three grains I'm going to show you are fairly special to us. I'll name them quickly. White Sonora, Turkey Red, and Blue Emmer. And I say they're fairly special to us because they're grown here in Boulder. These were all grown by Aspen Moon Farm. And this is actually a brand new crop that they just harvested, and we just picked up our first batch from yesterday. And they were our first farmer contact when we first started our business. And we connected with Jason and Aaron and told them what we were doing, and we met them at grain school, and they grow wheat, and we respect them so much as farmers and people. And we love partnering with them in every way. And we're so happy when we can tell people that these grains were grown right here in Boulder. They each have their different attributes. White Sonora is a soft white wheat, and it comes up through Mexico and New Mexico historically. Generally better for softer doughs and handmade pastas. The next is Turkey Red, which was big in the Midwest and Kansas, but did well in Colorado, and seems that a lot of farmers are growing Turkey Red now because it does well here. Turkey Red is great because it adds sort of a nutty robustness to your flour, to your dough. The next is Blue Emmer. And similar to Turkey Red, I would say it adds sort of a powerful flavor. And you can see the color of the flour is even a little darker. And when we make a pasta with this, if we use enough, believe it or not, the pasta turns like a subtle shade of violet. And we even have had to explain it to people at the farmer's market that no, it's not actually bad. It didn't go bad. It's actually just made with a blue wheat. And then they get excited about it when they hear that story. So we like to scare them at first and then tell them the good part. The last one we're showing is actually not a wheat, it's buckwheat. And we make a gluten-less pasta that uses buckwheat, and we fresh mill it here. We have a separate mill for that. We have 3 or 4 of our own little mills that we use. And we use buckwheat to satisfy those people who are still committed to not eating wheat, but they still want to eat craft pasta. So we have experimented with making a pasta with buckwheat, and we use chia seed flour. That was sort of just a guess one day as a binder, natural. So we buy white chia seed and we mill it up in about 10% of the recipe, and we combine it, and it holds together pretty well. It's still not a perfected recipe, I would admit, but people do like it, and it does not have wheat in it.
Or anything that is a filler or starch or anything.
So that's a general profile of a lot of the wheats that we work with regularly. We use different ratios. A lot of people will probably ask, well, which ones do you use and how much? I've heard it said by other people, just dive in and experiment. We could give some guidelines of things that we've found, but still there is something to just diving in and experimenting. I will say that one of the biggest things we found is that Durum still performs best for making pasta in our opinion. And in fact, we didn't buy Durum for the first year that we were in business just because I wasn't interested. I wanted to work with all the different heritage varieties of wheat, and I thought Durum was sort of too mainstream. And one day I just decided to test it out, and I felt that it added so much in terms of functionality and performance to our pasta that I didn't want to switch back again. And so we use Durum as essentially the foundation of most of the doughs that we build. And then we accentuate whatever we're trying to do with these different wheats, and each one does something different. Kamut is very beautiful. It adds sort of a golden, smooth, like a buttery flavor. And I could really perceive that on my own. Before I ever even read a description of it, I could tell what it was adding, and I kind of just kept playing with it until we got the right ratios that we liked. The white Sonora is a little bit neutral, I would say, but it's a softer white, so it's got it. I don't actually work with it myself so much because I do the extruded pastas. Claudia does work with white Sonora all the time because she's doing handmade pastas, which work well with a softer dough and with some egg mixed in. The red is sort of a benchmark for us too, and we always incorporate a little bit of red. It's sort of our standard dough is a Durum, a Kamut, and a red, those three. We actually call it DKR because it's become our basic dough that we make. We combine our own flour, and it's a combination of Durum, Kamut, and red. And then the Blue Emmer is sort of a specialty product that we do on occasion when we want to feature something that works well with that, or when we just want to have a testament to the growers who made this. I could continue talking, but I think I should probably pause for a second and see if any questions or if anybody wants to add anything.
No, I think the only thing is this is just the very basic, the overview of the grains. And as we go deeper in researching and getting more local farmers to grow those wheats for us, we kind of are discovering just on the Durum that there are many varieties, and this one is one that has been grown in Colorado. It was a partnership or a collaboration with Mad Ag, and Louis family farm grew this one, and it's called Bluebeard Durum. So within each one of them, there are a bunch of other varieties that we can use, and each one adds more flavor or different color. So I think this is basically what we have on the very, initial level of the wheats. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about the milling, and then we'll go to real pasta making. All right.
Should we pause, Dan, or any?
No, that sounds great. We did have one question come in from Alexis, just verifying or confirming that Grain of Truth book is the author's name, Stephen Yaffa. I think they were wanting to.
I should have held that up a little bit better.
Okay.
Stephen Yaffa.
No problem.
I don't know if
No, it sounds like great. And also just one curiosity too, just coming from, oh, there we go. One curiosity too, just coming from the farming side too, if you guys have any comments on the eggs you use, or if you've had any, if you notice any differences, or just kind of curious about that.
What did you say? The eggs you use?
Eggs.
The eggs.
Oh, the eggs.
Yeah. So, there are two different kinds of pastas that we're making here. One is the extruded, which means that we are using a machine. And for that one, we don't develop the gluten before going through the process. So it's basically flour and water. We mix the different kinds of flours, and we combine them, we hydrate, and then we go through the machine, which is basically like I like to say, espresso machine. It has some pressure has a tiny bit of heat, and the dies, which are the parts at the front of the machine that we are going to create the shape. So this is one process, and we normally do just with flour and water. The other one is the handmade, and that one I normally make with flour and eggs. It can be made with flour and water. You know, traditionally, Northern Italy used softer wheats with eggs, more as a protein added, while the southern of Italy worked more with durum and harder wheats and just water. There are many different things in the traditions, but technically for the handmade, we use that. Not that we couldn't extrude the flour and egg into the pasta. So it can be done both ways.
Great, and wonderful. And I'll just jump in real quick too. There was a couple questions in the chat side as well. And one question was, Michelle was asking, when you experiment, you know, what is your process? Do you keep notes? Is it methodical? Do you kind of go with what works? Like, it sounds like you guys have really worked through a lot of process, and there's just some curiosity there of how you've kind of come to your the products you're currently offering.
So when the farmers market was more active, I'll say, we were really busy making pasta probably 3 days a week. And to be honest, I was the only person milling the grains and mixing the dough and extruding the pasta. And Claudia was working on the handmade pastas and the sauces. But this was every day, and I was the only person. So I actually would be processing it mentally and seeing every day what certain hydration was doing and certain flours were doing. I honestly got to the point of adjusting incrementally to 1% the amount of, say, red that was added, and I could notice the difference at 1%. And even the hydration, I'm a nerd, and I was measuring the grains by the grams and the water by the grams. So I did have records, and I knew exactly how many grams we're adding to the gram. And I could start to notice a difference in hydration even at 0.5%, even almost 1/4%. And I know it fluctuates daily based on your environmental conditions, but so I did keep some basic recipe notes, and I was constantly playing with just minor adjustments every time we made pasta and watching and figuring. And it was really, I felt like working myself out of a hole, because it was a challenge to work with whole grains. And in the beginning, they jam up the machine a lot. The shards of bran can clog the machine, the die holes. And a lot of people had told me in the beginning, you can't make whole grain pasta on an extruder simply because of that reason. And I was stubborn and I didn't listen. And it is somewhat true. We've worked past it, and we've found a way to hydrate sufficiently that it softens the bran, and also the way we're milling helps as well. But I think we do keep records, and now that we're at a more sophisticated level and we're starting to wholesale, we keep a production sheet for every batch that we make now that details the exact recipe and notes as to how everything went, so that we can talk about it. And we do have an employee working with us now, so there's more communication. But in the beginning, it was really just
experimental and seeing functionality and taste. Right?
Yeah, and it was fun. It was fun to be obsessed with that for a couple of years, and learning every day what was working and what wasn't. So,
should we talk about the milling?
Yeah, that does sound. Sorry, what's that? You know, that does sound really exciting, and certainly a passion project as well, and it definitely shows through just through the screen as well. I guess we'll go to one more question, if that's all right with you, and then we can maybe move on. Greg was asking just to learn a little bit more about buckwheat flour. You know, he was asking, is there no gluten in buckwheat flour, and what is the protein? So maybe you guys can give just a little bit more information about how, you know, buckwheat isn't actually wheat, but maybe if you can fill them in just a little bit on your glutenless variety of pasta.
Yeah, so buckwheat is not a wheat, and it does not have gluten. No, I have read the story on why it was named buckwheat. I can't recite it right now. It looked like some other kind of wheat with a similar name, and they named it buckwheat, and I can't remember what that was, but
It's a seed, right?
it's a seed, and it's actually related to rhubarb, is what I've read, and that it's in the rhubarb family, and it just so happens that it mills very, very fine. They make soba noodles out of buckwheat in Japan, so it's not uncommon to make noodles out of it because Japan's been doing it for thousands of years. It does not like to be held together very much, and the soba noodle artists who do this in Japan are masters at it, and it's a very delicate process. And a lot of the bigger producers in Japan, from what I understand, do incorporate some wheat into it just to get it to bind.
Maybe Sonoka Sakai is a good resource, right?
Yeah. There's a woman in Japan, if you don't know Sonoko Sakai, you could, in California, you could look up Sonoko Sakai, and she's sort of an authority on buckwheat and has helped to bring a lot of attention to buckwheat and its beauty. It's from what I understand, a complete protein, meaning it has all the amino acids, which wheat, by the way, does not. I believe it's lysine that's missing from wheat, but buckwheat is unique in that it does have all of them. So in some sense, it may be even healthier than wheat.
Not only that, but it's also a cover crop, right? Many farmers can use that to rotate, different kinds of things that they are growing at the farm. So it's pretty good kind of grain. I think that's the way they call it.
Absolutely, and thank you. Yeah, thank you for filling us in. I always forget about the origins of buckwheat and stuff. So thank you, and yeah, I know it as a cover crop using it personally, just because it grows really rapidly. So sometimes you can, especially with a short growing season in Colorado, you can squeeze in a buckwheat cover crop towards the end of the summer, and it works well.
And it's totally beautiful, right? The flowers. It's just amazing plant.
Any other questions?
But also, Michelle was mentioning too that it's also a wonderful honeybee forage. So sounds like all around a great product. All right, I think we'll pass it on back to you guys.
All right, so I don't want to take up too much of our time because Claudia's going to do a demonstration. So I'll just talk kind of briefly about milling. So we do mill our own flour. We actually have 4 mills here. They're all the same style of mill. We have come to our own little conclusion. We're not the only ones actually, but that our milling operation works best when we don't stone grind our flour. I know that stone milling is sort of the pinnacle of artistry in milling and the historic beauty of stone milling, and everyone thinks of stone milling. And we were all for that and not in any way against it, but we found that stone milling didn't quite break the brand down enough unless you really got to a super large stone mill, which are very expensive. And even then, it may not quite break the brand down enough. And so what happens when you run an extruder and you push your dough through the extruder, it goes through a little die in a very small hole. And if there's little shards of bran that haven't been sifted out, which we don't like to do, they clog up the die. And other pasta makers have found this as well, and we kind of followed in their learnings, and we opted instead for what they call an impact mill, which we bought simple little impact mills, and we have multiple of them, and they mill to a much more, I guess the word is uniform granulation, meaning that the bran is all broken down and we don't end up with shards of bran. But that would be a negative perhaps for artisan bread, but for us, we just need that all broken down nicely to run through the machine consistently.
So just adding a little thing, it's not only because of functionality of the extruding, It's also the texture of the pasta. You know, quite often we talk to a bunch of people, and quite often people, you know, react to whole grain pasta about the texture. You know, cardboard is a word that I have heard over and over. And the fact that we are milling the flour to that fine and, how to say, uniformity makes the texture of our pasta, even though it's whole grain, to be closer to the one that people is more used to, which is the white flour semolina. So it's another part of it.
So what we do when we have a recipe, we weigh out our grains and we mix the grains together before we mill. We mix them up thoroughly so that when they go in the mill, they're all spread out evenly. And we mill it, and we come out with our own flour at that point. What I said before, we call it a DKR. That's sort of our normal flour that we mill, which is the Durum Camboot red. And what more can I say about milling?
Let me see if I have something on the notes here. You know, there was a sort of a question about how to mix different grains to make long noodles or formed pastas. In reality, I think the big difference is more in terms of, is it extruded or is it handmade, instead of the shape in itself. Because in the extruder, we can use the same kind of flour to extrude fettuccine, or we can do rigatoni. It's not a matter of the grains we are using. I think it's more in terms of the process. So I think that was one thing that we hear.
Dan, at this point, we were thinking to take a walk into our back room where we're actually making pasta right now and do a little tour. But I just wanted to ask if we believe that we have enough time, because Claudia still also wants to do a demonstration afterwards. So I wouldn't want to get to sacrifice that. So I'm wondering, looking for some guidance, if we should maybe skip the tour and go right to the presentation.
Just add something. Maybe you guys go there and just look at the extruder and be brief, because I need 5 minutes to set up here.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Yeah, we got just over 20 minutes, and we're caught up on questions right now. So yeah, and we can go a few minutes over. You know, this is recorded, so even if folks have to jump off, they can tune in later and catch the end. So there's no absolute hard stop here.
All right, so we're going to walk back in the room and try to not make anyone too dizzy, and we'll be brief. Hi, Claudia. Okay, so let's start over here, Andy, please. So this is our back room. We rented a space a few months ago for the first time, our own space. And we've got a room back here that is about 1,000 square feet. And we've got it set up to make pasta back here. We've got a supply of grain off to the side, and our inventories. And we actually have more grain coming, as Claudia mentioned, from a guy named Mark Lewis, who grew a bunch of wheat trials and wheat varieties this year, and he's going to be bringing a bunch for us to play with. So we're excited to work with Bouvier, Durum, and Red Fife, and some other ones that he grew. So I'll just show our little mills that we use. As I mentioned, these are called impact mills, and inside the unit they've got little hammers that spin around at sort of a high RPM, and they basically just smash the grain until it comes out at a certain granulation that you set. They're simple appliances, and at some point we'll need to upgrade to a bigger mill, but for the moment these three are still accommodating us. So here's a visual of some flour that we're working with today that's coming out, and some water that's ready. And I'll just give a quick view over here. This is Flavio. He works here with us. And Flavio is mixing the dough in a mixer. We use a stand mixer.
Good looking mix.
It is. This is on loan from Moxie Bread. So we mix the dough here, and we usually adjust our water as we're doing this. Although we have a recipe, we usually add the water at about 90% of the recipe, and then we slowly add the rest. And every batch is a little different, even at different times of the day. And the temperature in the room and the temperature of the mixer, they can all affect the hydration. So it's really kind of an imperfect process to get the right dough hydration. And we just sort of live with that and know that that's what we're dealing with.
So pretty dry to start.
Pretty dry to start. We work at about 36% hydration, which actually is wetter than the average white flour. Normal white flour Semolina Pasta is about 33% hydration. So 36 is above that simply because the whole grain suck up a lot of the water. So this is a machine that we bought a couple of years ago. This is an extruder. It's a smallish model, but it was enough to get us rolling. It basically tosses the dough in the back, and then it extrudes it out through a die. And we form different shapes. This one today is a version of garganelli. It's not a true garganelli, but it's close. Some people call it torchieri, but either way, it's delicious. So we actually have a new machine that's coming to us from Italy that's taken about 3 months to get to us, but it should be arriving this week. We're excited for that. So that's about it for the extruder. Any questions on that?
No, we're not seeing any come in, but that's neat to see everything in production for sure.
All right, so maybe we'll walk back so that Claudia can begin her handmade presentation.
Well, hi, Claudia.
So now we have some action happening here. So I can adjust the top to have it closer. All right, so welcome back. I think I'm going to just turn this off and talk a little bit about the handmade pasta. So what I have here is flour and egg pasta. And there are many different ways of doing, in terms of the process. The more traditional, very Italian grandmother style is when you get the flour, you pour into the counter, you create a hole in the middle, you crack your eggs. I call it the volcano, teaching pasta classes to kids, they love it. And you get a fork and you go slowly incorporating that flour and the egg and hydrating. It takes forever. It's really fun to do. It's almost like Sunday pasta therapy. But it works as well as if you just get a mixer and the hook dough, and then you put the flour and the eggs, and you go speed 2, slowly combining. It will take a little while, I would say between 5-8 minutes for the dough to start to form. The Semolina Pasta, which is the most common egg pasta, it's normally 1 cup of flour for 1 large egg. Because we use whole grain, you need more hydration. So I normally use 2 cups of flour for 3 large eggs. But I don't start with all the flour at once. I put probably about 2/3 of the 2 cups, and I put the eggs and I start mixing. it's much easier for you to add the flour if you feel that the dough is too wet than to try to add, and in that case, I would just put a couple teaspoons of water. So it's better to have a wetter dough and then add more flour. In terms of the flours that I'm using, and I have played with every single kind of flour, you know, from making the handmade pasta from 100% blue amber, which is kind of fun, but it's very unique. It has a lot of flavor, to what I feel most comfortable right now, which is about 2/3 of whole grain durum and 1/3 of white sonora. So that's the one that I normally go to, especially when I'm making filled pastas. You need them to be more stretchy. You need to be more delicate. So the white sonora as a soft wheat is going to give you that kind of pliability. So that's what I have here. For today, I did two kinds. One is just the regular, flour and egg. And the other one is just like for the fun of it, is I added roasted beets. So fresh beets, just roast, try to dry them. And then I put them in the blender with a tiny bit of water. And I added a little bit more flour and probably 2 teaspoons of this beet, kind of roasted beet juice that I have here. And you can do with anything. You can do with any vegetable, roasted tomatoes, or you can do greens. I normally blanch the greens beforehand because it helps them to keep the color. Some people do it with dry beets or dry vegetables. It works too. I just feel that one, when you use fresh vegetables, you can get them locally, and two, they add way more flavor to the pasta. So the process, we talked about the fork. You can do that. It's awesome with kids, or you can do in the mixer. Once you get the dough to form a ball, it's not really going to be nice and smooth, and it's kind of sticky in the beginning. So I normally grab it. I'm going to show, I have a piece here. So it's coarse, it's sticky. And what I do is I have a little bit of flour on the counter, and you do use this part of your hand. So you just kind of keep kneading it to incorporate as much as you can. And also because I feel that much of the handmade pasta making is about feeling. You do need to be pretty aware of how your dough is feeling at that day. There's no one recipe. Even if I use the same ratios, depending on the weather, depending on how the wheat was, how dry the wheat was, how long it has been milled, I need to adjust a little bit. So as you are kneading, what you need is for the dough not to be sticky, but at the same time not to be too dry that it's really hard for you to push. So if you just go, little by little, and you feel it needs to be in that kind of consistency that you feel that is a moist dough, but it's not sticky. And if it's too wet, you just put a little more flour, little on the counter, and you keep adding. Or there's a secret weapon here, which is basically a mist, and you can always add tiny, tiny bits of water. Again, it's better to add flour than water. So that's the easier way. Once the dough is formed, then you just wrap in plastic. And I would say at least about 20 minutes to let it rest, because during this time, it's going to hydrate the wheat, it's going to be softer, and most importantly, the gluten is going to start to be formed. Once we go to opening the dough, then you are also developing the gluten. In terms of opening the dough, there are a zillion different ways you can do. You can do the little gnocchi and then cut and use the gnocchi board, which is this. to make gnocchi, or you can make cavatelli, or you can do orecchietti. You can do all different kinds of pastas, or you can use the hand machine, which is fun, you know, with kids especially, but it takes a while to do. The KitchenAid mixer has those attachments, and I'm going to show you because I think it's for cooking at home. It's probably one of the best in between, not totally handmade, but it's super helpful to have this. So you just attach this to the mixer and works pretty well. I do have here a professional big machine, and the process is pretty much the same. You know, there are 2 rollers, and you're going with your dough through them, not only to make it thinner, but also to develop the gluten. And I think it's my engineering mind is you can optimize your pasta making if you think about geometry too. So the more lasagna sheets you get, the easier it's going to do any kind of pasta. Because you start from a big sheet, and then you're either going to cut as a fettuccine or a spaghetti. And if you have something that is really rectangular, all your noodles are going to be with the same length. If you're doing raviolis, you're cutting it in a way that you try to get, let's say, 2 or 3 across and a certain amount on this, you know, direction. And then you're just not wasting dough, having, you know, extra dough that you have to rework. So the process is you just get 1 piece of your dough, you flatten, and you get the setting. It's going to make a little bit of noise to be the widest opening that you can have. And then you just go, first pass, you fold in half, and then I do turn the dough 90 degrees. This back and forth with the way you are running the dough, it does help to strengthen the gluten, and it's going to be easier to work with the shape that we're going to do. So you run, it's not going to be perfect in the first or second, so you keep the same setting. If it feels sticky and it's going to, you just add a little bit of flour, and then you go again. I'm not changing the setting, I'm just going with the same. So the shape is not perfect yet, but it's going to get there. The idea is you gotta try to get it thinner, but also wider. And it's easier to do with a mixer because it's not as wide as this one. You can go both ways. So it's still in the same setting, and fold in half, just kind of trying to work the geometry of it. Once it starts to look kind of somehow even, you can start adjusting how thick the setting is. And you do that, don't skip any setting, because if you make it really thin out of a sudden, go one by one by one, it's going to stick to the rollers and then it becomes a mess. So just go little by little with the settings. And you keep going and changing a little bit. You know, it's not really looking rectangular. So what I'm going to do is fold again, go back one setting. And different machines, they do have different settings. You know, there are 2 main brands. It's Atlas and it's Marcato. And funny enough, some starts with a thicker on 1 and the other ones on 7. So you need to just kind of look and see how wide and if you are going in the right direction. So you just keep doing, depending on what pasta shape you're going to make, you want a different thickness. Generally, if you're doing something like tagliatelle or a pappardelle, something like that, you want it to be a little thicker to have a little more bite, because you probably combine with a thicker sort of ragu. If you're doing ravioli or tortellini or something like that, you do the thinner because you do really want to have the delicate pasta with the filling inside. So that's normally how you go. So you keep doing this, you know, I'm not going to get to perfection right now because I want to show you something else. But that's the idea. You keep going and rolling. You try not to get it too dry, you know, it has to be somehow sticky, but not too much. Because if you're doing the filled pastas, you need a little bit of that moisture. It doesn't look beautiful or perfect, but I'm going to stop here. So it's something that people have been asking about, and it's pretty fun to do, which is those pastas that have the little flowers in them. And it's basically super simple. You just make your lasagna sheet. I do like to use this just to add a little bit of moisture and to make sure that the flowers stay in the right place. So you get to, let's say, you're going to make a pasta that you're thinking will go to setting number 5. So you are probably at setting 4 here. And then what you do is you sprinkle just a tiny, tiny bit of water. So you have the entire sheet here. And then you get cute flowers. You know, I got those are called violas, and growing gardens brew that. They sell that here in Boulder. And then you just sprinkle your flowers in there. You know, create your own designs. You can do this with herbs, you know, sage leaves or parsley, oregano, whatever you feel like. The idea is just to embellish them. So you sprinkle them where you want them to be, and then you fold the dough on top. And then you press a little bit, you know, because of the water has a bit of thickness to it. So you just press, and then you go back to the machine and you really press them. Now they get a little squishy for sure, but that is pretty much how you do it, as simple as that, you know, to get the flowers in them. So you go as far as you can, a little bit before, and then you just press them through the machine. You know, in the beginning, I was like, you know, the cutting needs to be in the right spot. It doesn't necessarily, because when you're going to cut, and you can use the cutter from the machine or pastry cutter, once you cut, you squish the flour already. So it's going to be super easy to cut. So I'm going to do, you know, a little bit of flour always.
What if you hold it up like this?
Yes. So let's do like this. You can see, you know, the little flowers inside. It gets super pretty, depending, you know, if you do it with time and patience. So then you just cut to the thickness. No, pappardelle, thicker, fettuccine, thinner. There are rules to that. So you just go and cut the noodles. And from here, you can either put in the boiling water. Fresh pasta cooks super, super fast. So something like this is just 1 minute. Or you let it dry a tiny bit, very little, I would say like 5 minutes. And then you can put in the freezer and put in a cookie sheet. Is that the way? And you freeze, and then from the freezer to boiling water, and it will stay there for a couple weeks. So this is more like a pappardelle that we have here with the flowers, the little flowers. You know, I don't think I'm going to open this one, but it's the same idea. You know, it might get a little too sticky because of the beads. So you just work with the flour and add the flour as you go. I do like to use whole durum to open it. It gets, you know, a bit more the texture, the right texture. And I think that's it. I don't know if you guys have any questions.
That is just beautiful. Yeah, I think we'll end with two questions. The first one, Emily was asking, and Andy, maybe you can hop in here too a little bit, but Emily was asking just for recommendations for pasta flours for home bakers, you know, folks that may not have direct access to direct from farm grains or maybe have their own mill.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about that? You know, you can mill at home, right? If you have a mill.
They're saying if they don't have a mill, where would they
Oh,
get pasta
okay.
flour? So does King Arthur sell good pasta flour? Or is
I
that-
know it's bread flour. You know, I think, yeah, the Durum is, I don't know if there's Durum really commercially.
So one source that we do buy a lot from is called Central Milling. They at one point were probably a micro mill. They're not really anymore, but they still do a lot of different varieties of stuff. And if you go on their website, centralmilling.com, they've got a whole shopping section of all different kinds of grains, all different kinds of degrees of milling, different kinds of flours, hundreds of products, and organic or not organic or whatever you want. So I would check them as a starting point. For sure, they have something that you could find there.
Yeah, that is more on the heritage, ancient, fresh, not fresh milk, but whole grain category. You know, the more traditional Italian pasta makers, they normally use that Caputo brand, which is an Italian brand that they use. They have Semola, which is a finer Semolina. You have Semolina, and you can always blend. You know, I do feel strongly about whole grain, and I do love the 100% whole grain. I think it adds a lot to the pasta, but it's not as easy to find this kind of flour, whole grain, heritage, ancient. But you can always blend.
You can find somebody with a mill, and if you're in Boulder, you can ask us, and we'll sell you some flour. Or Andy also sells flour. It may not be pasta flour, but anybody that has a small mill, I think, could help you too with fresh milled. I mean, it's a whole different world. So even if you want to write to us, or we'll figure out how to help you.
Yeah.
Great. No, thank you. And, you know, I think, you know, that's the point too of working with some of these regional grain, you know, Renaissance organizations. You know, we have Colorado Grain Chain. If you're in Colorado, there's a way to connect across that full spectrum. You know, on our last session with Amy Holleran, she mentioned a great number of regional organizations across the country where revolution is happening. So there are ways to plug in and work together and learn from each other. And you know what you mentioned too, you know, I loved how you're kind of defined craft by the two words of care and pride, and that's just really exciting. And boy, Andy, you're reading my mind, because my last question was around, you know, how to find some of your products, you know, not only for everyday eating, and I can't believe I'm thinking of this right now, but for even like holiday gifts. You know, it's always challenging to find some locally produced products that time of year with Colorado's growing season. I know my friends and family are tired of receiving honey and soap and jellies and pickles and dehydrated products of some types. So as far as Pastificio products, you guys mentioned the Boulder Farmers Market. Where else can folks access your products?
So right now we do have them mostly locally. So we do partner with 8 to 10 farmers here, and they are selling our pastas at the farm stands or as CSA add-ons. So that's one. You can find at Moxie. So Andy is selling our pasta too. We do sell online, pastificioboulder.com. We are soon going to start shipping them. If you're not in Colorado, we're going to start shipping the dry pastas. And in a few weeks, I can't really spoil the beans or the grains right now, but we are also going to be at a grocery store in just a couple weeks. So just, yeah.
Yep, we'll have a wholesale product available in regional grocery stores coming soon. But in the meantime, we're scattered around the local market, and we will be developing further an online shopping channel as well too. So, and we have that already. If you're not local and you want some, just email us and we will send it to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ted and Claudia, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing how your business grows and develops, and how that methodical experimental process continues for you too as you hone in on things. But that's really exciting. And thank you to everyone that joined us. I'll just mention that you can get this video link at coloradograinchain.com. You can also learn how to sign up as a member. Members are privy to some of the other secret wisdom that is being passed down from all of our wonderful presenters. So feel free to go on there, and we'll try to get any other questions answered from Ted and Claudia as well on there. And then just one final reminder for folks of the next bake sale for racial justice is happening September 19th. So sign up for email updates. And then also that Kim was mentioning that you can send a hello at grainchain.com, send an email, and they're happy to help connect you to some folks that are doing this type of work, maybe in your area if you're not from Colorado as well. So I'm happy to kind of build that collaboration and network. With that, I think we'll say goodbye, but thank you again, Ted and Claudia. This was a great session and really appreciate it.
Really awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the time.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Have a great day.